So our first guest is one of the authors from Strive Publishing. She has a memoir and her name is Colnese Hendon, and she's going to tell us about her memoir. Welcome to Black Authors Matter TV.
I think you're still on mute, Colnese. There we go.
No matter how often I'm on Zoom meetings, it happens every time. It doesn't even happen. That's just part of it.
I always get caught with the hot mic. I mean, I'll take myself off of mute. But one time I was waiting for a meeting to start and I'm just talking about my dining room table and how I'm going to exchange it. And then somebody said, "You're on a hot mic."
Oh my
At least
God.
you weren't talking about anybody in the meeting.
Yes, that's exactly what I said.
Right, that's good.
Well, Colnese, thank you for being a guest, and you have a memoir. And tell us the title. Do you have a copy of your book with you?
I do. It's called Blend In or Fade Out.
Okay, turn it a little bit because it's a glare.
There we go, right there.
Okay, right there. Okay, blend in or fade out. And
I like the title. I can kind of see where you're going with that.
Well, actually, it's interesting because the artist, Barbara Thomas is the artist who did the cover art.
okay,
And so initially my book had a different title, and I don't think that's unusual. I think a lot of authors start their work with a title in mind. And so I had an idea for, she's an artist. I have like one of her oil paintings, and I had talked to her a long time ago. I'm like, if I ever finish my book, I'd like you to do my cover. But I had a whole different picture in mind, but the picture did not match my title. And my title initially was Between a Black Rock and a Hard White Place.
Mm.
And so I let her read part of my memoir, and she happened to have sold this picture to a hairstylist, and she said this is the right picture because she drew this art. She's also, just ironically or coincidentally, she's also a biracial adoptee. And so she drew this picture with that whole idea of when you're adopted and probably biracial as well, you're living your life trying to blend into places that you sometimes cannot blend into. But the title of her artwork was actually Fading Out and Blending In, and she said it's okay if you switch it up. So anyway, that's how I got my title, and that's how I got my art. And it does actually work better, I think, than the title that I had originally thought of. So it all worked out for the best.
It's good when you have when you have an open mind, because you already had this concept in mind, and because you were open-minded, you were able to let her show you her vision, and then it still aligned with what you had in mind.
Absolutely, and it's actually, I swear, it's like it was just made for me in this book. And something told me it's like they may ask me about this title, so have an answer ready.
okay.
You know us so well.
So I don't know. It kind of does fit. It does fit, my book. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. I started out, well, actually the story arc is about me finding out as a child, probably about 3 years old. My mom and dad told me I was adopted. And that planted a seed in my mind of wanting to find out who my biological parents are. So the story arc that's where it begins, and then it ends with me actually meeting my biological parents. But along the way, and I remember my dad used to tell me, "Colnese, you ought to write a book." And and I was like, yeah, because my life is way more interesting than anything I could ever make up, I think. I mean, I've been through a lot. So what, how life is, sometimes when you don't get what you want, and there's a spiritual piece to my memoir as well, because it wasn't like, as I was going through my life, it wasn't always a spiritual experience. But when I look back on my life, I can see where God was. I can see where I wasn't aligning my life with the will of God, and I can see what the consequences were. So when I was initially trying to find my birth mother, the records were sealed. And I found that out at a very young age because one day I just looked up the Hennepin County adoption and I called and I asked, I told them, oh, I'm adopted. I want to find out who my mother is. They were like, oh, well, your records are sealed and,
Mm.
you can't find out. And I'm thinking I was around 8 years old because I was old enough to come home from school as a latchkey kid. Mom wasn't home from work yet. So I was old enough to kind of watch myself. My brother was a few years older, so we could come home from school and be there for a while. So anyway, it wasn't until I was about 15 when I had family. We every summer we would go on a family vacation to Chicago, Illinois, where my dad's side of the family lived, then Indianapolis, where his mom and stepfather lived, and we would go on to Ohio, where my mom's family lived. So this particular summer, every year when we would come, you know how family is, they want to take pictures and, kind of document the moment. So this was back in the day where they had Polaroid pictures. You had to wait, as they developed.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
so we were sitting there waiting for the picture to develop. And then they passed it around. And for some reason, I don't know why that was the year that it hit me, but I was sitting in the center of my dad's family, and all of my dad's side of the family, well, I should say, of course, every family has different shades and different variations of color. But my dad's side of the family is brown, dark brown skinned people. And then all of a sudden I noticed myself sitting in the center of everyone, and I just looked so out of place. I looked at my complexion. Back then I had this huge Angela Davis afro, and I was so hurt when I noticed, it was like, you don't look like the family. And so the rest of that, and I promise to be quiet after a minute to let you get your questions in, because
No,
I could just
no, it's
keep
your
going.
story. This is your world.
So I had a little cousin named Pudgy, and he was my favorite cousin. And he's from Chicago, and we had all come down there together. And he's 6 years younger, and I used to carry him around on my back, take him to get candy, the candy store. It was like we were tight because all my other cousins were much older. And so once I looked at this picture and I noticed my cousin Pudgy and his little brother and everybody blending in, looking like each other, and I didn't look like them. And I just got very upset and I just kind of shut down. And so I'm just going to get to the point. This is where I was saying I kind of went out of the will of God at this point in time because I made up in my mind at 15 years old, if I can't find out who my biological family is because of sealed birth records, I know what I'll do. I'll have a baby of my own. And I don't think I'm alone in that with young teenage mothers. Teen mothers, become pregnant for a lot of reasons. A lot of times, yes, it's an accident, but sometimes it's intentional. And in my case, it was intentional. So I'm not going to go further. I'm going to stop right there. But that began kind of my path. Um, the path that I was on began to deviate from what my mom and dad had set out for me. My mom and dad, I couldn't ask for better parents. Sometimes I even question, what right did I have to even look for my birth parents? In a way, sometimes it's, even though it was a deep down need and desire within me, when I think about how good they were, and excuse me, I'm going to try to stay on target right here, but I had really good parents and they did every single thing they could to give me a good life. So when I think about the fact that why did I have, such a desire to find somebody who obviously did not want to find me, at least that's how I looked at it.
Mhm.
I felt like any mother who could give her child away, why am I looking for this person? But it was something I can't explain. I think for people who grew up with their biological family, it's not something that you can really explain too much, but it was a deep down desire. So that's what set me on the path that I was on, to have this baby, even though I wasn't too young to take care of it, you know. So yeah, so I don't know. I told myself today, it's like, tell the community a little bit about your book to get them interested, but don't tell your whole story because then they're not gonna want to read it because they're gonna be like, she just sat there and told us the whole story. So I'm trying to
Well,
walk
we
that
still don't
tightrope.
know all the details. I mean, you
Right.
have to
And
read a book to find the
you
details.
have you have actually made people want to read it. I
Yeah,
mean, we have
yeah.
comments here saying that people can't wait to read your memoir just based on what you've said.
And it gets even more juicier. So I'll tell you a little bit more. So so the man the young man I should say who I fell in love with, um he they called him Blue because he was very dark skinned, and he was extremely well dressed, extremely athletic, just charming, had a big megawatt smile, and he melted my heart. And but that particular year, it was 1974, and 73 and 74, and I may get these years off just a bit, not much. The Mac, Superfly, those were the movies that came out.
Yes.
And every young man, I won't say every because I tend to exaggerate, let's say quite a few of the young men in my community decided that they wanted to be pimps. And he was the same way. He decided he wanted to be a pimp. And so our whole relationship switched from, childhood sweetheart to him trying to turn me out. But
Mm.
in between that, there was a tragic loss of our baby. I wanted this baby. This baby was kind of like my bridge my to me having a biological connection, and it was my bridge to being able to fit in because he came from a very popular family. Um, his siblings, they were like known in the community. They could all dance, roller skate. You know how certain things in the
Yeah.
neighborhood make you popular. They
Right.
dress nice. They
Mhm.
all had cars, at a young age, and just a really popular family. And they were all like stair steps. So their house was like the teenage hangout. Everybody wanted to be around them. They were very well known. And I was excited that, this is my boyfriend and my baby's going to be part of this family because all of my relatives lived in out of state. I grew up in Minnesota, and all of my mom and dad's people lived somewhere else. That's why we went every summer. We went to visit relatives. So I didn't have any relatives in town outside of my brother. So when the baby was stillborn, he turned against me. It was like I think we were too immature. I was 16, he was 17, and
Oh,
losing a baby at any age is hard for any couple. But when you're a teenager, I just don't think you can't handle that type of grief. I certainly could not.
mhm.
And so, anyway, that's kind of where I'll put a pin in it for now. Don't be surprised if I tell you more as we continue our conversation because it gets juicy. It's juice. I'm gonna be honest with you. One of my friends texted me when he found out that I was finally, because what, I'm embarrassed to tell you guys, I've been writing this book for like 30 years, but I started writing it way back, and even there's a few poems scattered throughout it when I lost my baby. I was always a writer, even in grade school. And when I lost my baby, I wrote poetry about it. When he rejected me, I wrote about it. I always wrote. So even though at that time I didn't know one day I'll write a memoir, I always saved the things that I wrote. And that's one of the things I like to say to any authors that are out there or want to be people who are writers but have not yet been published. I just want to encourage you to save your work, save whatever it is you write, because I always did. Call me a hoarder or whatever, but I always saved my writing because I liked what I wrote. I mean, it was meaningful to me, and
Mhm.
what I found out when I got into this process of writing my memoir, a lot of those things that I had put to the side and didn't think anymore about, they are interwoven throughout this story because they were relevant. It turns out they became relevant as I began trying to look at what is my story. Because when my dad used to say, "Connie, you ought to write a book," and I wanted to, but I kept trying to figure out what is my story. It's like I've had lots of components to my story. This what I'm telling you guys about is just at the very beginning of my life. But throughout my life, I've lived different things, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this. Through life, very few people start at one place and stay on that same course. People change careers, people change relationships, people change uh, cities,
Locations,
yeah,
locations. Mhm.
locations. Yes.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so yes, I didn't know what to write about, but it just suddenly came to me. I don't know how or when. It was through the process of writing when I was taking classes about like the story because I had written. I'm more of a short story writer, and I'm more of a type short pieces type of a person. So when I was trying to figure out how am I going to do something long, first of all, is difficult, and all of you who've done it know staying with it and trying to figure out where you're going when you're in it. And especially when you're writing about trauma, it's hard to stay focused because when you're writing about it, or even when you're even through this process of putting it together to submit for publishing, I had to relive it every time I reread it,
Right.
to get it in shape, to even send out. And it was so dead. It's not like this anymore, audience, but it was so depressing at first for me to read. I had to revise it and add some happiness. I had to, because of course we focus sometimes and sad on the negative, but I had to inject some bright lights. Um, but getting back to the Lord, okay, I have to bring God into it because when I look back on my life and I look at how self destructive I was, when I look at how violent I was at times and vindictive, and every negative emotion that comes out of feeling rejected, not only was I, in my opinion, I learned since that maybe that wasn't the case, but as before you know the answers, you tell your own self story. So I told myself the story that I was unwanted, that I wasn't worth
Yeah.
anything, my mom didn't want me, and that caused me to act in certain ways. So even to this day, I don't like rejection. I think anytime, I'm just making a gross generalization. I think people that have more stability in their psychological makeup, can be rejected and they might feel it, but then they let it roll off and keep going. Me, when I would feel rejected, I would lash out like very violently sometimes because, and I've since learned this, that it's like reopening a trauma or a wound. It's like it would take me right back to that feeling of rejection. So I just looked at how the Lord brought me through, and I didn't know at the time He was bringing me through, but He was bringing me through in my darkest hours. He was giving me little um, breadcrumbs. Like at one point, I got a job at a daycare center, and the children loved me. Every day I come to work, oh, teacher's here, and just the love that they gave me, and so that's a small thing, but there's little lights, and I really encourage anyone, and I'm hoping that part of my reading audience will be people who have been heartbroken, who have fallen in love with someone who doesn't love them back, who has given up hope, who may have been suicidal, who may have lost their direction. I'm hoping that they will get something out of my story because I didn't know it then, but now I know that what? God God will lead you out of dark places if you allow him to do it. If you allow yourself to not be so self-destructive that you ruin your life before you can get to a better place. So
Well, I
that's
know
that's the message.
we're running out of time, but one question I did want to ask you, that was kind of in my mind as you were talking, is that do you believe that writing the book was therapeutic for you as you were going through it? Or do you think that writing the book was because you had been through a therapeutic moment, with prayer and so forth, and you felt strong enough to write the book? So do you understand the difference?
I think I do understand what you're asking, and I do believe there's a little bit of both. I do believe writing the book was therapeutic, and I think that's why I always turn to writing to try, sometimes it's just to process things. And so yes, but I don't know, did I answer both? Because I know that was a two-part question.
Right. Well, yeah, I think you answered both. I was asked because there are some people who write a book because they want to deal with the pain of whatever it is that they're writing about, while other people will write the book because they've been through it. They've been through the pain. They understand the pain, and now they want to write about it because maybe they want to help somebody else. So I just was wondering which one of those was it for you? Were you
Yeah, I
writing
think,
because you
yeah,
wanted to deal with it?
I think I wrote, like I said, when I started writing it, I didn't know where it was going, but I wrote to process. But then now that I've written it and have completed it, now I hope it does help somebody. I now that I've kind of gotten through it and I've learned some lessons that I've tried to share through my writing, I hope and pray it does help somebody.
Well, one
Amen.
thing about your memoir process, which is good, you didn't, because you have been writing these little stories for many years, you didn't have to try to recall or recreate things from the past,
Mhm.
because details fade as time fades. We remember like the crucible, the impactful thing, but some of the details fade. And if they're written down, then it's a way to capture how you actually felt at the time rather than trying to remember how you felt. But I know when we have traumatic things happen, the feelings, we do, as humans, we do retain that. And I think what you said you went through, I believe all humans want to know where they came from as far as
Right.
parentage. And, those of us who know both of our parents, we don't have to look for that. But you just never know how people respond to not knowing. I know in our family, we found out when we were adults that we had a sister um, that my dad had when he was a teenager before my parents got married. It was so um, and she, we talked to her. I mean, we have a relationship with her now, but we didn't grow up with her. So, we had to develop a relationship. And she tells about how she always wondered how it would be to be, in our family where, there were four siblings. My dad was very well known and respected. He was a pastor of the largest Black church in my city. So uh, she said she grew up wondering how that was, even though she knew her mom, but she didn't grow up with our dad. She would see him. I think we didn't even know she existed. So she said she would see him from time to time. So
Yeah, I was blessed that I grew up with just one brother, and I always wanted a sister, and it turns out that I have seven sisters. So it's it
Wow.
was like my cup runneth over when I did find my biological family. It was like it was greater, in terms
So
of
it
number
was
and in
actually
terms
a good thing for you that you looking for them because you were able to answer a lot of questions that were in your mind and you were able to disprove the story that you told yourself.
amen. Yes, that happened. And one thing I'll say, about Strive Publishing. So similarly to me searching all over, searching like for my biological family, when I found them, they're right in the same neighborhood where I grew up. They were there
Wow.
all the time. I used to run into my family and didn't know they were my family.
oh
And
wow.
my journey trying to find publishing, I traveled to DC, New York, I've been to Vermont, I've been to Italy, even trying to build connections and find agents and this and that. And then when I finally got published, it was through a publishing company right here in the Twin Cities, which is a wonderfully enriching experience. So it just goes to show you sometimes what you're looking for is, it's just like the Wizard of Oz. It's right there in front of your face. You just have to open your eyes.
That's amazing. That you ran into family members and didn't know they were family members.
Wow.
My birth mother banked at the bank I worked at. My biological father, I was on a bus with him one time and he kept staring at me and I looked at him thinking he'll look away and he kept looking. Then when I finally met him, he said, I remember seeing you on the bus and I couldn't take my eyes off you because you look like my oldest daughter, who he thought was his oldest daughter. But
Oh,
I'm
wow.
older, in case you're looking, if you're looking,
Wow.
Kathy, I'm older than you.
Wow. You know, that it is amazing how genetics work. Because the sister that we didn't grow up with when we met her, she looks exactly like our grandmother, like our
Wow.
father's mother. She looked, and none of us look like our grandmother. She looks exactly like our grandmother. So that's genetics.
Yep.
That's-
And I always thought I have freckles, and I always thought they came from the white side of my family. My birth mother was white, but then when I met my father's side of the family, they all have freckles, and they were like, "Look, she got our freckles," you know. So it
Oh,
was like kind of a stamp or like a tattoo. God tattooed me so that my family would recognize me when they saw
Well,
me.
I wish we could talk longer, but it is already 8:30, at least 8:30
Okay.
my time.
7:30
But
Central. So
yes, but I would love it if you could just remind everybody where they can find your book. I did put your website in the chat, and somebody else, who was that? Oh, somebody else. Oh, Mary Terrace. she put your other website where from Strive Publishing into the chat. So we have two different ways where we can find your book.
Yes, so you can go to strivepublishing.com or colnesehendon.com to find
Mhm.
the book. And it'll be published in March. So it's not out yet, but it's coming very soon.
But is
oh,
it
okay.
available for
So
pre-order?
it's a pre-order. Okay.
Yes, pre-order.
Wonderful.
Please do. Please pre-order, people.
Yes, pre-order. That is big. She can debut as a #1 bestseller if we pre-order the
Order
book.
her book.
Let's do this.
All right.
Well,
Well,
thank you so
Colnese,
much for having me. I appreciate it. I enjoyed myself with you, and I hope you did too.
Oh,
well,
thank you for being
You have
with
a
us.
very fascinating story. We appreciate you being a guest on Black Authors Matter TV.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Okay. Good night.